Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on which part of the world that you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us at the webinar today. My name is Saumu Lwembe. I work for the National Institute for Health and Care Research, where I serve as the Assistant Director for Patient and Public Involvement and Engagement and Community Engagement and Involvement. For those that do not know what the National Institute for Health and Care Research is, it's one of the major funders for health and care research here in the United Kingdom. Today, I am delighted to be chairing this webinar. Initially, I was going to be with our colleague Heidi Surridge, but unfortunately, she's not able to join us today because she has a family emergency, but she sends her warm wishes. We are fortunate, however, that my colleague Rosina Hussein has agreed to step in at the last moment to help me to chair this session. So I'll now hand you over to Rosina.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosina Hussein. I'm a Senior Programme Manager within the Community Engagement and Involvement team at NIHR. I just want to go through a few housekeeping rules for today. So all microphones and cameras have been muted. We have a chat function enabled. Please introduce yourselves, tell us your name and the country or region you are joining us from. We also have a Q&A function. Our panelists will respond to a set of questions that were submitted to them prior to the webinar today. But please feel free to use either the Q&A or the chat function to submit your questions. I would rather use the Q&A function though, please, to just make it easier. And also you can upvote the question that you like as well. These questions will be answered live on air. So finally, the closed captioning is also available by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen. So over to you. Thank you, Samu.
Thank you so much, Rosina. So this webinar is actually the third in a series of webinars in a program of work, which will enable reciprocal learning or sharing of global health innovations in working with people and communities. And this could be novel ideas, inventions, processes, approaches, and learning aimed to improve health and social care research outcomes. The first webinar was delivered in last year, September 2024, and that explored the diverse approaches used to engage communities in health and care research in different geographical contexts. We discussed how these different approaches can be used to improve public engagement in both domestic and global settings. The second webinar was delivered early this year in February, and that explored public member motivations for and experiences of involvement in health and care research, underscoring what meaningful involvement looks like in different local contexts and how public and community members interface with researchers to improve research outcomes and integrity. So today's webinar is going to explore how policymakers can be involved in health and care research. You know, policymakers are part of key stakeholders included in the NIHR definition of community engagement and involvement, and they are key partners in the research process. For us, we realize that they play a crucial role in championing the voices of communities and advising on governmental health priorities. They can influence the uptake of research outputs into policy and practice, enabling the translation of research into real-world contexts. Now, noting that policymakers are key stakeholders in this process, this webinar will offer an inspiration that will help to foster positive relationships with these stakeholders. We will gain a deeper understanding and insights on the value of engaging policymakers early and throughout the research process. Now, we do understand that there might be challenges, but we also know that they are enablers, which we will be exploring with our panelists today. And talking of panelists, who do we have joining us today, Rosina?
Sorry, we have a wonderful panelists today. So if I start first to introduce Dr. Salim Ali Hussein, a public health expert and head of primary healthcare networks in the Ministry of Health, Kenya. With a strong background in medicine and health system strengthening, he has played a pivotal role in advancing Kenya's primary healthcare and community health services. He is a passionate advocate for patient patient-centered, community-driven healthcare and has made significant contributions to national policy development aimed at achieving universal health coverage. And we have Professor Dame Tina Lavender, a leading global health expert in maternal and newborn health, currently serving as Professor of Maternal and Newborn Health at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine and Director of its World Health Organization Collaborating Centre for Childbirth, Women and Newborn Health. Her research focuses on improving outcomes in low and middle income countries, with a particular emphasis on stillbirth and neonatal death prevention. She advises the World Health Organization on maternal health guidelines and has been recognized with numerous honors, including being named a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2012 and one of BBC's 100 Women in 2015. And finally, we have Dr. Siham Sikandar, a psychiatrist and global mental health researcher focused on maternal mental health in low-resource settings. He holds positions as a research fellow at the University of Liverpool and a senior clinical lecturer at Mersey Care NHS Foundation Trust. Known for his work in Pakistan, he has led major studies such as the Bachpan cohort and played a key role in adapting the World Health Organization endorsed Thinking Healthy program for community delivery. His work informs scalable, culturally sensitive interventions that improve mental health outcomes for women and children globally. I'll now hand it over to Samu to continue with the conversation. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rosina. So as you can see, our panelists today have a diverse range of expertise, and the first set of questions is going to explore this in detail. And my first question will go over to you, Dr. Salim Ali Hussein. Given your role in advancing Kenya's primary healthcare and community health services, how has community-informed research contributed to the development of national policies for universal health coverage?
Thank you very much, Saumu and the team. First and foremost, we are very grateful to be invited for this webinar. This is very important and it comes at the right time. For me, I think community engagement in research is very important. One, for them to give their perspectives and their feedback that will actually influence policy. They can't give this perspective and feedback if there's no better way than research. So I think the community is looking at the different spectrum of the communities, including the community members and the different other audiences, like even the policymakers as communities. I think it is very imperative that it is important they are informed by a particular mechanism. And for me, this is the research. And I think the vice versa is also true, that research can actually influence what the policy makers make, but also the policy makers, if they are left uninformed and they're not evidence-based, they can actually affect things, including research, in a negative way because they make policies which are not evidence-based. So it is very important that these communities actually are brought in a very meaningful way, engagement in research. More importantly, I think the communities and the research people should not be an afterthought. I think they need to be put together. For us, for example, in Kenya, there's a lot of influence that the research after the communities have been involved that have affected, for example, our universal health coverage policy, which was much actually influenced after community feedback on what is working and what is not working. And currently some of the things that have been put on board, including the legal aspect and the legal acts on board, they were basically trying to address what the communities were talking about, looking, for example, at the Primary Healthcare Act, which actually was also evidence-based before it was done. The digitalization, which is bringing the service delivery in a better way. And actually before, for example, the electronic community health information system was put on board. Actually, those are landscape assessment that was done to look at the readiness of the different governments in Kenya. We have the counties. So it was actually researched, influenced by the communities, and the communities influenced the research in terms of how we are getting to a UHC. Our PHC also basically, a motive of it, what we are doing, the models that we have put on board, either they were research done directly, there were studies on return on investment or done in Kenya, but also looking at globally and regionally what has been done. So communities, I think for me, are very vital in terms of affecting research and also research affecting the communities. Thank you. Back to you, Saul.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. And the bit you talked about communities being very important in this research is one that actually launches on to my next question, which I will direct this to Tina Lavender. So you are an advisor to the WHO on maternal health guidelines and lead researcher on the prevention and management of stillbirth and neonatal care. How do you see the role of involving people and communities in influencing the development of global health policies and recommendations?
Yeah, well, from my experience of leading an NHR group and then a subsequent unit, we've learned an awful lot. And I do believe that policymakers and community members have an absolutely huge role in many different ways. Firstly, I think that they have a role in influencing the research question at the outset, contributing in terms of things like consensus meetings so that their voices are heard right from the beginning. They also have a role in delivery of the research, through, for example, stakeholder meetings, and making sure that those priorities are aligned to national and local priorities. Also, I think they have a role in dissemination and advocacy. And one of the things that we've learned is by bringing community members and policymakers together, we've been able to really encourage meaningful dialogue between the two for greatest impact. Sorry, I had a bit of a computer hiccup then. And one example of this was some of the work that we did in Zambia, and we brought the community members together with the policymakers, and the community members, they talked about their experiences of stillbirth, and this was a direct catalyst to then a national audit taking place related to stillbirth. I also think that they have a real role in the development of implementation strategies. And our examples of this are that policymakers have informed some of the work that we've done on respectful maternal and newborn care. They've also helped to get members and partners of the group and the unit onto influential guideline development groups through their invitations, which is really important. And they've instigated the involvement of partners in various different groups, connecting people together, making sure that the work that we're doing is aligned with other groups, for example, advocacy groups, charities, different professional groups. So my experience is that they have an absolutely huge role.
Thank you so much for that. And Tina, one of the things that you mentioned there was about how the convening of community members and policymakers together playing a catalytic role. And I want to pick more on that and come to you, Dr. Skanda. Now, we understand that your work in scaling up care for perinatal depression through technological advancements has influenced the Pakistani government to roll out trials. Guide us through how that happened and in how you worked with policymakers to achieve change and impact.
Thank you. I'll just sort of resonate and pick up both what Dr. Hussain and Dr. Lavender was saying. It's through this mutual consensus building engagement, and the particular project NIHR funded program that you're referring to didn't happen all of a sudden. What That's sort of almost like the pinnacle of 20 years of our engagement in Pakistan through not only organizing and building capacity within an organization at a very grassroots level, within the community settings where all of our research is based, developing individuals. Testimony to that is I am one of those people who developed their capacities. Similarly and simultaneously, we all know that policy a policy environment is not based on one person. So it is usually an archipelago of entities. So you need to be aware of who to engage, what are the programs. So to make it more concrete, we've been engaged with what we call Lady Health Worker Program, which does lots of family planning, MNCHR type of work, preventive, promotive. That's where all the perinatal women are registered, at least 85% of our population within the rural settings. So engaging with them from the outset, as well as developing capacity at the grassroots level. So this has been a continual, ongoing 20 years worth of engagement. So that's how we've been able to position ourselves to carry out this very important public mental health and public health relevant research to address perinatal mental health in Pakistan, which is around 35%, which has high burden. Simultaneously, we've been fortunate to have had champions of mental health sitting in the policy environment. So, for example, the last DG Health, a dear friend, was a pediatrician by training, but a mental health champion. For a very short period of time, we had a state minister, by background, universal health coverage expert coming from WHO background, was also a mental health champion. So we've been fortunate to identify people who have been mental health champions within the policy environment, but simultaneously working on developing capacities within the communities. So I think that's how this has come together. Happy to talk more about this as we move forward in the webinar. Back to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Siham. And yes, I'm really keen for you to talk more about this. And our listeners, please use the Q&A function to raise any questions that you want our panelists to respond to live. But Siham, when you were speaking, one of the things that you spoke about that resonated quite strongly with me was the fact that you went in an environment recognizing that there was already work that had taken place in that environment. And I think you said 20 years of work. And the other, so it's not like you just went in there and started something new. It's almost like the ground was already warmed up and you respected that and just capitalized on that. And the other point you mentioned there is around the allyship with the policy environment, really identifying and supporting champions that you could work with that could, support you in the policy conversations. That's really great because that moves us quite neatly actually around the lessons learned, because obviously what all of you have talked about here appears like the successes, if you like, the outcomes of work. But we know the environment is not always that straightforward. Having said that, there are key lessons, I think, that are of benefit to our delegates today. So I think I'll start with you, Dr. Salim Hussain. What lessons from Kenya's approach to community involvement in health policy do you think could be valuable for our global North contexts that are facing similar challenges with diverse populations, you think?
Thank you very much, Saum. Just to allude to some of the things Dr. Skanda and Dr. Lavender have talked about, the issue of working together for a long time and the mutual participation sometimes is not just automatic, and it is not obvious that it happens. For example, for us, where I sit, it's almost a hit and run relation. I only call them when I want to review my strategies or I want to develop one. Otherwise, I don't sit with the researchers. They don't know what I'm doing, which I don't think should be the case. I think that sitting in, we should work together, mainstream research into policy and also mainstream policy into research and have mechanism to have that framework to work together is very important. For example, just an example, I'm thinking, for example, for us in the Ministry of Health, we have a research section, which actually we do not even meet, even sometimes throughout the year. So it would be better if this research section, if it had their people or they had some interaction with us, whether it is quarterly or even twice in a year, come sit with us, ask us what is our research agenda. And even they need to know what are we doing, how are we operationalizing them. By the time we go and call them for them to help us to do a research, they already know, they have an indication of what what are the problems instead of this hit and run. And also for the researchers, I think it's very important for them not to make their research or the environment look so complicated. They're just talking about confidence interval and which we don't understand. Bring it to a policy brief, something that we understand. So I think the things that actually the North can learn for me is this participatory research design in implementation of what we are doing, coming up with our policies. It is very important that we have stakeholders like forum. Of course, the issue, for example, for us, giving even the community health workers a tool to use. For example, currently, a lot of their service delivery for us, our community health promoters, actually is done by a digitalized tool, which came up after a landscape assessment that was done, which is very important currently. In Kenya, we have a lot of decentralization, and the community for us are very important, beside the intervention in terms of the policy formulation. So I think for us, we have a very strong community ownership and participation in what we are doing and what we put. So institutionalization of the community health workers in terms of mainstreaming them for us, for example, into the formal health sector, that we even enumerate them, we capacity build them, and we even give them tools to use is very important. I think last but not least, I think the issue of social accountability is very important, something that we can pick and we can learn, so that it's not just us giving them, but also them holding us accountable, what we're giving them in terms of quality, in terms of their priorities and what they need, so that looking at the community is not just a moral imperative, but looked at as a strategic advantage to have them on board in terms of policy, in terms of even research, so that what we are doing actually is literally informed, including all the communities across the board. Thank you. Back to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein, on that. And one of the things, again, that resonated quite strongly with me when you were speaking was about, let's not leave relationships to chance. We have to be very intentional in creating these symbiotic relationships. And also, it's about creating those reciprocal accountabilities if we are to achieve what it is that we are looking for. Can I come to you now, Professor Lavender? We understand that your research has influenced governmental policies on stillbirth and neonatal care. How did you go about working with policymakers to achieve this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We're currently working with 8 different countries, and slightly different according to the country, but some of the key things that have been really important probably build on some of the things that Dr. Hussein has said. So we involved the ministry from the outset, working with our partners, not when we got the grant, but in the development stage, so pre-award. And we didn't do what I know happens, is that people are putting in an application and they say, quick, we need a letter from the ministry to support it. But actually going to the ministry, talking through it, actively engaging way before the application goes in. Involving the ministry throughout the research delivery. As I said previously, we have regular stakeholder meetings that include community members, health workers, policy representatives, and this has been critical for the delivery of our work. For example, we have one study in Tanzania related to a mobile phone app for antenatal care in rural Tanzania in Manyara. So it was really important that we involved the information technology communication arm of the ministry, as well as the reproductive health arm, so that they were both part of our stakeholder groups. So that was critical to make sure we align what we're doing with what they already have planned and are pursuing. We also tried to make sure that, you know, that the partners and the members had a seat on the important tables, so a seat at the table where decisions can be made, and the ministries helped us to do that. And one example, actually, Dr. Hussein was in Kenya. We've got a large work related to bereavement care for women who have had a stillbirth or a neonatal death. You may know about this working with Carvey and the University of Nairobi. So we made sure that there was somebody there, one of the partners, one of the midwifery matrons actually, who sat on the guideline development to make sure that the work can feed into what's going to happen. Also, I think that sometimes we give policymakers a lot of information, but it's also about listening and saying, you know, what is it you want? What can you tell us? What can you do that can help what we're doing, either at the delivery or the implementation stage? And I think that's something that we're getting better and better at. We also had, you know, policymakers, both local, national and international, on our steering group. So for our large trials, for example, we had people from WHO, you know, as collaborators, as well as national policymakers, and I think that is important. And I think that the other things that perhaps we've learned is that, you know, if we want stakeholder engagement, proper stakeholder engagement, that needs to be costed into your grant. You know, they have to have the resources to do that. Yeah, and the other thing I would say is if you're not having regular correspondence or communications with the Ministry of Health, be prepared that the person that first signed off on your project won't be there the next time you come, because Ministry of Health or Ministry of whichever ministry, they change frequently, and that's something else we learned. So you need that active engagement. So I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, a great insights there, Tina. One of the things, again, for me that stood out was the element around power sharing and representation. So making sure that the policymakers and the stakeholders that you want involved have a seat at the table, not just to be seen, but to influence the research. Coming back to what Dr. Sono was saying earlier on around policymakers being part of the research and the researchers being part of the policy making. So really having that. And it takes money, so budget for it. Thank you so much for that. Now we'll turn to you, Dr. Seham, to get your advice or your lessons learned from your work. So based on this experience you've had working both in Pakistan and in the UK, what are the key similarities and differences in how involving people and communities impacts policy uptake in these distinct settings?
Thank you. I think 3 or 4 key sorts of lessons. One is that we're trying to bring all these global lessons within these low resource settings. So I not only work in Pakistan, but also in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. And learnings from there, trying to bring into the UK to address the inequity across the ethnic minorities. You'll be surprised how similar perinatal mental health status amongst the ethnic minorities is. It's really comparable to the more LIMIC or low resource setting countries that I work in. The lesson that or the strategy that I've really picked on, especially in this last program that you were also referring, where we used technology enhancements, we used lived experienced peers, other women, other mothers living in the same communities to pick up an intervention, get trained, and address perinatal mental health amongst women. What we did as part of our CEI engagement and events in Pakistan, and we replicated certain things in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh as well. What we made these women do was come and talk to the policymakers, academicians, sitting in conferences, provide their narrative. And I think this was an extremely powerful and impactful advocacy tool. Human narrative. People who are delivering the intervention are lay people. They're not government employed. They're peers with lived experience. Them stating how they've managed, how their own capabilities have enhanced, and how they're supporting other women. Showcasing and bringing women with perinatal depression, providing their narratives. So we've had some policy makers say that the intensity and the realization of this problem quadrupled in their mind. So this tool, if I may use the word tool, this leverage of advocacy by narration and narratives is a very powerful tool, and we're trying to do the same here in the UK. Of course, the principles remain the same. You need to have continuity. You need to know who needs to be seated on the table, as Professor Lavender was saying. What we've learned is if we have lived experience, experts by experience, sitting on decision-making groups, your governance groups, I think the policy people, as well as the general other stakeholders, start seeing things in a different light. So that's another lesson, that have your experts by experience represented all across your governance structures and key decision-making bodies. And of course, last but not the least, in the UK, we're trying to quickly understand what's the landscape. How do you traverse the policy making corridors? So identifying people, identifying the pressure exerting voices. So, for example, in our university, two of our professors, they are part of the Declan program in psychology, but they're also sitting on the panel and revising the curricula for the next sort of generations of clinical psychologists in perinatal mental health. So integrating some learnings and interventions. So identifying your stakeholders, creating that narrative-based advocacy, having experts by experience sitting across the table making decisions is something that are the lessons that we're trying to bring back from Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. I'll take a pause there. Happy to elaborate further on this. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Seham. And you've, I think, recapped really well the points you raised there. But one of the things that stood out again for me is advocacy by narration and narratives, almost the power of storytelling and, embedding that in your research, and really representation of people with lived experience across the research pathway. And key for me is about what is the lived experience we're talking about here. Is that the lived experience in policymaking? Is that a lived experience in the disease area? Is this, so really being intentional around what experience is needed and making sure that that is represented in there. We seem to have lost Dr. Hussain. Hopefully we get him back. Oh yes, you're there. Okay, you just disappeared. Thank you. Great. So delegates, again, encouraging you to post your questions. Very soon we'll be picking up your questions. I have perhaps one last round of questions for the panelists, then we will pick your questions that are posted in the Q&A session. So let's come now. The last segment of these questions is really about the advice that you all, as our key panelists today, have for our researchers that are listening in here. So perhaps we start with you, Dr. Hussain. From your Minister of Health perspective, What advice would you give to researchers who wish to engage with policymakers to ensure their research has relevance to local policy?
I thank you very much. I think one of the things that, for me, research is standard. That should not be debated. I think when the researchers are meeting or talking to policymakers, especially the Ministry of Health, I think what should be discussed should be the scope. Sometimes you need to look at what needs to be done at a particular time, looking at resources, looking at the time frame, and also manpower. For example, if I need to review my documents, do I need to do a deep research? If it's possible, I think that's the best. But if not, could we do a SWOT analysis? Could we do a situation analysis? I think something at least that can be done at that particular time is feasible, and also looking at the resources. I think the other thing is that we need to have this continuous working relation. We should not live as if we are hired mercenaries just when we are needed, so that we are in tandem, we mainstream each other, we know what we want, and they can actually even advise us in terms of research. I think the other thing is also in terms, sometimes researchers come with us with a lot of things to implement, and sometimes they are not really our priorities. I think it will be best for them to come up to what is our priorities at that particular time, so that when we're implementing, actually, we are owning these researches, and we can do it at the best of our level. Thank you. Back to you, Sam.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Hussain, for that. Delegates, please upvote your questions if you want them to be dealt with by panelists. So I'll come back to you, Dr. Professor Lavender. And so I know you've got so many lessons as researchers, but I would like you to stick to one. So what is the one lesson you would like others to carry forward from your experience in engaging with policymakers?
Okay, so my one would be don't pay lip service to policy engagements. Start early, build that relationship, listen to the policymakers, and align your work to priorities that they may have.
Thank you. Very brief, very on the point. And how about you, Dr. Sihem Sikanda? So same question. What's the one lesson you would like, or you would want others to carry forward from your experiences in engaging with policymakers?
I think you should know the context very well. You should be very well versed with the archipelago of these entities. Find champions. Invest your time, energies, quickly learn. I think in the debrief, I was saying that as a testimony, one of the program managers that I was working with years ago, he complimented me. He said that Siham's learned the vernacular, the vocabulary of our policy environment. And here I am, I'm still struggling with basic terminology like what's a randomized trial, what's blinding masking. And I said, that's a testimony that you need to immerse yourself. Don't see this as an afterthought like Professor Lavender is saying. And one key point is continuity. Like I said earlier on, it's taken us 20 years where we are. So please don't confuse that this successful program just happened out of nowhere. So there's a big backdrop of this. So spending time just means just around 20 years, and it's an ongoing process. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that. And the anthropologist in me just gets intrigued by the whole element of immersing yourself in the communities that you want to work with. So we will now take the questions from delegates. And the first question is from Ariel. And the question is building the bridge between policymakers, decision makers, community leaders, Let me just take that question again. Building the bridge between policymakers, decision makers, and community leaders turns key, but always challenging. How do you deal with power imbalances and inequities between them? Shall I get you, Professor Lavender, to take that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is, no doubt power imbalances. I think just talking from my own program on stillbirth, we did quite a lot of work with the community members. We set up community involvement and engagement groups, and we gave training on the research that we were doing, the key messages, so that they felt a little bit more prepared. But in actual fact, even though there was that power imbalance, they were quite keen to share their stories and to have their voices heard. And I think we were the tool to enable them to do that. So within our own programme, I don't think it was too much of a challenge. I think the bigger challenge that we had was that stillbirth was when we started 20 years ago, and still to some extent is quite a taboo subject. So getting anybody to talk about stillbirth is a problem in the first instance. And I think that having people from the ministry kind of recognising the importance of that allowed people to feel able to talk about it. So I'm not sure whether I've totally answered the question. Others might have things to add, but that's just from my experience. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And obviously, creating that environment, that's one of the things that stood out for me. Creating that environment, in a way, just addresses in itself the power imbalances in there. So I'll pick the next question from Richard. I'll direct this to you, Dr. Seaham. Please, can you give examples of where communities have suggested research projects? And what were the outcomes or impact of the research findings on the policy and practice in healthcare of those and other communities?
Right. So if I understood the question, it's like how priority setting in terms of research was done by the communities themselves. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. How those examples where communities suggested these research topics and how you went about addressing them.
Of course.
Yeah.
That goes back to being in the community. We set up an organization within the community settings where we work. We've recruited multitudes of different levels of people. And since I work primarily in the perinatal mental health space, so lots of women working for us from the community. So they've been our source of the key things that need attention. For example, domestic violence, stress, distress, disempowerment, etc. And this is just in terms of, I work across the life course, but I'm just giving this as an example that setting up a community-based organization, having people from the community feeds into all the things, all the relevant things, or the needs that the communities may or may not have, for example. So I think that's the key. It's connecting with the communities, staying within the communities. I think in our debrief session, I was telling you the group that I work with, we set up an organization, a research NGO. Eventually, after 24 years, they were just the second organization to have held a formal agreement with the Ministry of Health. It took us good 25 years to sign a letter of intent and a memorandum of understanding. The first NGO was the USAID, I suppose, and we were so we went through that whole process. So being in the communities, whatever your universe of work is, some people work in the hospital settings, so then you have to be guided and living almost there, as you said, like an anthropologist. Hope that helps answer the question.
Thank you. I'm going to take the next question from Savi. And Dr. Hussein, perhaps your policy perspective can be helpful in this one. And Savi says, my question is about research on improving healthcare or addressing determinants of health for members of marginalized communities. Even if some policymakers are sympathetic, senior politicians and decision makers may not give high priority to addressing such concerns or view such communities negatively. In your experience, what approaches work best in such situations? So obviously your experience as a policymaker researcher will be helpful in this.
Yeah, I think it's very important, even when you're talking about collecting views, getting communities' perspective, that we have mechanism and framework, and in fact, even legal frameworks. For example, here in Kenya, the government cannot do anything if there's no community participation. And actually, somebody can go to court and say that they're bringing this program, or they're changing this, or they're bringing this road, but they did not involve us. And the court actually will just nullify it because there's no public participation. But also, having legal framework say that public participation, for example, is a mandatory. It needs to be seen. How is it being done? For example, somebody can just put an advertisement in the newspaper and say that we are going to do this program. Does that qualify as a community engagement because they were made to know that it is coming? But also preparing them in an objective manner so that the engagement actually is meaningful. Yes, there's a legal mandate, but technically, how are you preparing them? So, for example, here, if we're coming up with, which we are actually doing currently, we are coming up with a quality bill for healthcare and patient safety. So what we have done is, one, we have come up with that, we have formulated that bill, but we are mandated to go to all the 47 counties. And at least in those counties, you have to go to 2 sub-counties. You have to talk to the communities. After that, the ministry has done it, but the National Assembly, the Senate, which are our parliament, we need to do it also, so that they also go and get the perspective of the community, so that it's not a Ministry of Health thing. So the mechanism of how you're doing it, legal framework, actually, to make sure that those concerns, those perspectives are put on board are very important, and which I'm glad that some of these actually are mainstream in the Ministry of Health and in the government of Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. So the next question I'll pick, and it's, I think, directed to funders. I'll probably take this one myself. So this is from Vijay. And Vijay is asking, given the importance of engagement and involvement of policymakers in research that the presenters have emphasized, should engagement and involvement of policymakers in research design and implementation be one of the areas that is factored in while screening and funding research proposals? What are some of the key aspects in research design and research implementation to enhance possibility of uptake or adoption of research findings leading to changes in policies and practice in LMIC settings? So this is a really good question. And my immediate response, Vijay, is that this is already happening. It's something that we can strengthen, obviously, with our funding selection committees, but that is happening. And we tend to work with our initially prospective applicants at the funding application stages through webinars to highlight some touch points that these things need to be reflected on, and post-award working with them as well to still highlight on the importance of doing this. So it's happening, but obviously there's always room for improvement. So delegates, please continue to upvote the questions that you want the panelists to respond to. I now want to turn to the panelists themselves, because I think between you have wealth of expertise, and I'm sure as each of you were speaking, perhaps it steered some question that you might have for each other. So does any one of you have a question that you want the other person to respond to? Yes, Tina, go ahead.
Maybe I could ask Dr. Hussein a question related to my own programme. So, as I said previously, we have a large bereavement trial being carried out in Kenya and Uganda as well. The trial has just finished, and we're analysing the findings. What advice would you give to myself and the wider team of how we get those findings? If we show a positive result, how do we implement those findings? What would be the best way for us to do that?
Thank you very much, Prof. I think the first thing for anything to be implemented or to be owned later, I think the most important thing is the initial engagement, even before the trial, before the pilot, and before the research. I think if we involve, for example, if you come to the Ministry of Health and say that we have this that we want to do, and we like later, if it is positive for you to implement, it becomes easier than when it is done, the trials has been done, and then you come to us and tell us, we have done this. And then in my mind, I'm saying, after they're finished is when they're coming to me. So whether it is good or not, I look at it as if it was an afterthought. They didn't really mean to bring it to me. So I think for me, the first thing is to have the engagement. It's just like, for example, M&E.
We did do that.
Yes, M&E should not be the last thing to be thought about. M&E should actually be done with the programming, with the planning. So initial stages, I think bringing the policymakers on board, implementation becomes very easy, and ownership. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Okay, Sihan, go ahead.
Since we have Dr. Hussain who represent the ministry side of things, I'd just like to understand from his perspective, because I do understand that research, being a research-minded person, and ministries also need to develop that research culture to try and pick up what's good evidence, what's not good evidence. Are there any suggestions that Dr. Hussain, you may have for researchers like me who were once told that Siham's learned the vocabulary and vernacular of the policy side, but we still struggle with terms as simple as, what's a randomized trial? So what can be done to help facilitate the understanding and learning of research as such for the policy environment? Are there any suggestions or approaches that you may recommend?
Yeah, I think two things. One, the aspect that researchers need to come down to our level so that they bring things that we can understand, things that we can actually relate with. For example, if you're talking to a Ministry of Finance, and if you're going to tell them about the researches in terms of indicators, how they're improving health impact, they will really not listen to you. But if you tell them that this health in terms of how they're affecting the national building, the economy, the return on investment in terms of how they're doing. I think one, talking to their own language. I think secondly, the issue of living as siblings, it's very important so that we don't look as researchers, those people there who are doing difficult things, who want to only come and maybe answer some questions that we don't know. So when we sit together, when researchers come and actually be part of us, understand us, and then we also try to understand you, then it becomes easier to relate and actually accept what the researchers are doing. Like when the researchers sit very far away. For example, here in Kenya, our research body, which is the Kenya Medical Research Institute, actually sits very far from the Ministry of Health. So we only collaborate when somebody actually thinks about it. But most of us policymakers, some of us don't even think that research is important. Some of us sit down in the offices and actually change documents without any evidence. So it's very important that we have policy and policymakers, but we should have policymakers and the policies that have actually been driven by research. Otherwise, it becomes even worse than not having a policy. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Very interesting discussions there. I'll come back. I'll now turn to the questions from the delegates. And this question, Professor Lavender, I'll direct this to you, and it's submitted anonymously. And the individual is asking, how, as a researcher, do you deal with the frustration people with lived experience? Sorry, let me just take that question again. How, as a researcher, do you deal with the frustration people with lived experience that they have told their stories time and time again and nothing changes? Because as much as we are trying to change things for these communities, we are also working within complex systems that compound inequalities that we had minimal control over.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, I don't disagree with that at all. I think it relates very much to one of the other questions about how long, asking about the evidence around getting policy implemented following research, the evidence to policy mechanisms. And I think that, it does take a long time in order for things to change. Speaking from my own work, I think we have moved a long way, but it's taken, a really long time to do that. I think that it is frustrating, but I do believe that the community members' voices are just critical. And I think that, I think some of the community members have been part of the other webinars, and I think they will have, I'm sure, have voiced how it's actually really helped them to share their voices, and that they feel that things are happening as a consequence of those voices. So I agree it's a challenge, but I do think it's possible, but it does take a long time.
Thank you so much. So we really have a lot of questions. And when I look at the Watch, it is not very friendly. So I suggest, if that's okay, Professor Lavender, Dr. Siham, and Dr. Hussein, if you can glance through those questions and type in your responses to the questions that you feel are most suited to you. And I'll move us over to Rosina, who has been very busy on the background, picking up some of the key elements of discussions. Rosina, can I invite you to offer your reflections and any key take-home messages that our delegates can take with them?
Thank you so much, Samu. Really interesting discussion. It was really difficult to keep up, actually. So a powerful theme was emerging that there is a need for intentional, structured collaboration between the researchers, policymakers, and communities. And we heard some great examples from the work from each of our panel members, really. And another key takeaway was the role of community engagement. Dr. Hussein described Kenya's model, where community health promoters are integrated in the formal health system, which is a great example of how a community engagement and involvement is working, I suppose, within the policy circle itself. And this model built on local ownership and participation and really does influence what we are trying to do here at NIHR with the research that we fund. And we heard about social accountability, that communities must not just receive the policies, they should also be empowered to hold institutions accountable for what's delivered as well. A consistent message throughout this discussion was the genuine engagement between researchers and policymakers that requires early engagement, sustained engagement, and it's got to be purposeful as well. So policymaking isn't just about receiving research at the end of the project, to really involve policymakers right at the very beginning with clear understanding of the scope, timing, resources, and priorities. And Dr. Hussein said that interactions should not be transactional, that researchers should avoid showing up only when approvals or reviews are needed, that a continuous working relationship is essential. And flexibility is key. Sometimes a full research study may not be ideal or may be ideal, but other times a SWOT or situational analysis might be more practical given the constraints. And we heard about some of the key learnings from Professor Lavender about don't pay lip service to policy engagement, start early, listen actively, and align research to existing priorities. And something really important that Dr. Sikandar mentioned was about really learning about the policy ecosystem, its language, power structures, and cultural nuances as well. And researchers must invest time and build trust and find champions within the system. So I think I'll stop here because I know we're running out of time. Over to you, Samu.
Oh, thank you so much, Rosina. I think that is really well captured, summing up those conversations there. So really thanking everyone for getting involved in this work. Just to say that the webinar recording will be available on the NIHR social media channels. You will also receive a link to the email that you used in registering for this webinar today. But can I suggest that you visit our CEI web pages on the NIHR website. There's a lot of resources there that you'll find really helpful. And one of the resources that I would really want to highlight is our podcast series. And you will find one of the episodes that we released recently on inclusive CEI in health systems research will be very much relevant to the topic that we discussed here today. So if you can go to those pages. I think you'll find them useful. We also have an online course on community engagement and involvement, and some of those modules are really, really important to strengthen your capacity to engage with policymakers. Otherwise, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to the delegates and everyone who joined us today. We hope you have all taken something out of this session today, and that it has inspired you to enhance your approach to working with policymakers, working with people with lived experience through the whole research life cycle. And we look forward to seeing you again in the next iteration of this webinar series. So that's thank you from me and the NIHR.